The chilling night air wrapped around Daniel like a suffocating blanket as he parked his car near the entrance of Blackwood Forest, commonly known as the Whispering Woods. The name alone sent shivers down the spines of locals who avoided it like the plague. But Daniel was no ordinary traveler. He was an investigative journalist, obsessed with the eerie stories surrounding this forsaken place. Everyone who entered was never seen again. The last known case was just a month ago. A group of hikers, all experienced, vanished without a trace. No bodies, no evidence, just silence. As he stepped onto the muddy path, his flashlight flickered briefly. A bad omen. He ignored it, pushing forward. The dense trees loomed like shadowy figures, their twisted branches reaching out as if trying to warn him. The deeper he went, the more unnatural everything felt. The air was heavy, as if the forest itself was breathing. Then, the first whisper came. At first he thought it was the wind, but the longer he listened, the clearer it became. Soft, almost seductive voices calling his name. Daniel, turn back. Daniel, ... His heartbeat spiked. How did they know his name? He spun around, the flashlight shaking in his grip. Nothing. Just darkness, swallowing the trees behind him. Suddenly he spotted something ahead. A clearing with an old wooden sign. Barely standing, the words were scratched out, but a few letters remained visible. Do not enter. Daniel smirked. Classic horror cliché. But he had come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath, he stepped past the sign. The temperature dropped instantly. The forest, once alive with chirping crickets and rustling leaves, fell into an unnatural silence. Then, footsteps. Not his own. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. His breath hitched as he whipped his flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. But when he turned back toward the path, his blood turned ice. The path was gone. The trees had shifted, trapped, and then the whispers turned into laughter. Daniel's breaths came in short, sharp gasps. His rational mind tried to grasp onto something, anything that made sense. The trees couldn't just move. This had to be a trick, right? Maybe he was disoriented. Maybe his fear was playing games with him. But then, why was the laughter getting closer? He swung his flashlight wildly, the beam cutting through the dense fog that had suddenly rolled in. Shadows twisted unnaturally between the trees, some small, some towering, all shifting as if they were watching him. He took a slow step back, heart hammering. But the ground beneath his feet was no longer solid. It was soft, sinking. His flashlight flickered. For just a second, the ground around him lit up. Daniel's stomach twisted. Hands. Pale, bony hands were breaking through the soil, fingers clawing their way towards him. Buried bodies trying to escape. Panic surged through his veins. He ran. His feet pounded against the damp earth, lungs burning, the trees closing in. The whispers turned to wails, a chorus of voices crying out in agony, begging for something, begging for help. But he couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Then, ahead, a dim glow, a cabin. No, it was too small, too ruined, barely more than a shed, but it was something, a place to hide. He threw himself inside, slamming the rotting wooden door shut. Darkness swallowed him, but at least the whispers had stopped. He struggled to catch his breath, his fingers trembling as he searched his pockets for his phone. No signal. Of course, his flashlight was his only source of light now. He clicked it back on, the dim yellow beam cutting through the dust-filled air. And that's when he saw it. The walls. They weren't made of wood, not entirely, They were covered in photographs, old, faded black and white pictures. He stepped closer, lifting one off the wall. A group of hikers, smiling, posing, the same hikers who had gone missing last month. His blood ran cold. Another photo. A man in a ranger's uniform holding an old lantern. His face was hollow, his eyes blank. He looked familiar, too familiar. Then his fingers brushed against the last photo, the dust falling away to reveal himself. Daniel staggered back, his stomach twisting in horror. The picture was old, decades old, but it was him. Same face, same clothes, same expression of terror. A noise, a creak from the floorboards behind him. He turned slowly, the flashlight shaking in his grip. A shadow stood in the doorway, blocking his only escape. The last thing he heard, before the light flickered out, was the whisper of 1,000 voices. You were never meant to leave. Daniel's body locked up in sheer terror. The shadow in the doorway didn't move, yet it felt like it was closing in. His breath hitched as the dim beam of his flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows against the cabin's warped walls. Then, the whispering started again. Soft at first, like wind brushing through leaves. But it wasn't the wind. It was voices, hundreds of them, overlapping, calling his name. The shadow figure took a step forward. Daniel stumbled backward, his heel catching on the uneven floorboards. His body slammed against the wooden wall, knocking down more of the eerie photographs. They scattered across the floor like fallen leaves, revealing something underneath. Carved symbols, ancient, deep gouges in the wood, a language he didn't understand, but one that sent ice through his veins. This place wasn't just haunted. It was a trap. The shadow figure took another step. The floorboards beneath it didn't creak. Daniel's survival instinct kicked in. He lunged toward the only window, its frame covered in thick cobwebs. He slammed his fists against it, once, twice, 3 times, until the brittle glass shattered. He didn't hesitate. He climbed through. The jagged edges tore into his jacket, slicing his skin, but the cold night air hit his face. And he was running. Branches whipped at his arms as he sprinted, pushing through the thick trees, heart hammering like a war drum. The whispering didn't stop. In fact, it was getting louder. Something was chasing him. He felt it. The presence right behind him, inches away. He could hear the rustling leaves, the near silent footsteps. It wanted him to trip, to fall, to make a mistake, but Daniel wasn't going to stop. Then, a flickering light ahead. His lungs burned as he pushed forward, the trees suddenly parting, revealing something impossible. A ranger's station, old but intact, its windows glowing faintly as if someone or something was inside. He didn't think. He ran straight to the door. It swung open before he could even touch it. Daniel hesitated. The air inside was warm, too warm. And then he saw him. The ranger from the photograph, sitting in the chair by the fireplace, back turned to him. Slowly the figure turned. Daniel's heart stopped. The ranger's face was his own, a mirror image, a twisted, lifeless version of himself. The eyes hollow, the skin sagging like it had been rotting for decades. "You made it," the ranger said, voice empty. "Just like I did. Just like they all do." Daniel shook his head, stepping back. No, this wasn't happening. The ranger raised a hand pointing to the wall behind him. Daniel didn't want to look, but he did. And he saw them. Names, carved deep into the wood. Dozens, hundreds. His flashlight flickered again, and at the very bottom of the list, freshly scratched into the rotting wood, was his own name, Daniel. The whispers erupted into screams. The room spun. Darkness rushed in, and then silence. Daniel was never seen again. Hikers who ventured too close to the whispering woods would sometimes hear a voice calling for help, faint, desperate. But no one who followed the voice ever came back.